Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Fred Varco, a member of the Professional Activities Committee. Before we start, can I ask you to turn off your phones or turn them to vibration mode? We will have some slides, which you can see to my left, to your right, and we'll have a speech of about 20 minutes, and then we'll have questions and answers. Interpreting is Andrew Meehan, thank you very much. And our two guests are Rochelle Kopp and Naoko Nishikawa, organizer of Jingu Gaien wo Mamoru Yushi Net and editor-in-chief Kenchiku Journal. We're talking about redevelopment of the Jingu Gaien area, of which I have great memories, having spent many hours sitting at Jingu Stadium watching the Yakult Swallows lose games, as well as at Chichibunomiya Rugby Stadium, which is the center of Japanese rugby. So, as we've seen with the Olympic Stadium, redevelopment should be done with care and with consideration for the people of Tokyo, but maybe that's not the case. So first I'll ask Rochelle Kopp to explain part of what her campaign is, and then we'll have questions and answers. Rochelle?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and delighted to have the opportunity to be here. So as was just said, we're going to be giving you an overview today of what's been happening at Jingu Gaien related to the redevelopment plan. This plan threatens Tokyo's green oasis and the historic sports structures that are there. So I'm Rochelle Kopp, and this is Naoko Nishikawa, and we're going to be sort of switching off with the slides. So I'm going to hand it over to her to begin.
Jingu Gaien は神宮内苑と一対のものとして1926年にできました。このエリアは風致地区としての規制によってその景観と環境が守られ、100年近く神宮外苑は都会のオアシスとして東京都民に親しまれてきました。4列のイチョウ並木は世界三大緑のトンネルの一つとして知られています。
Jingu Gaien, or the Meiji Emperor's exterior landscape garden, was made in 1926 to complement the Jingu Naien, the interior landscape garden. And this area has been protected for its environment and scenery by the nature preserve regulations. And it has been enjoyed by residents of Greater Tokyo as a sanctuary in this metropolis for nearly 100 years. And the 4 ginkgo tree-lined blocks have been included in the world's top 3 tunnels of greenery.
神宮外苑には野球場、ラグビー場、市民に開かれたいろいろなスポーツ施設があります。人気のカフェもあります。それらはすべてたくさんの木々に囲まれています。ここには荒れ地を森に変えた先人たちの英知と努力の歴史があり、100年かかって出来上がった特別な環境があります。そして東京都民にとって思い出のたくさんある場所なのです。
And Jingu Gaien offers a broad range of sports facilities for the city residents, including a baseball stadium and rugby field. It also has some popular cafes, and those establishments are all surrounded by trees and by many trees, many of them. This site is the culmination of both brilliance and work put forward by those who came before us, who turned the barren land into lush greenery. It is a special environment that took 100 years to create. it also is a special place for many residents of Greater Tokyo.
しかし、都市の中にある神宮外苑という 58.5 ヘクタールにも及ぶ広いスペースは、再開発の標的となりました。そのうち 28.4 ヘクタールに再開発計画が持ち上がったのです。2020東京オリンピックが再開発を促進したと言われています。風致地区のため15メートルあるいは20メートルに制限されていた建物の高さが75メートルにまで許されることになってしまったのです。
Now, Jingu Gaien, which is a space covering 58.5 hectares in Tokyo, has become a target for redevelopment. Of the 58.5 hectares, 28.4 has been marked for urban redevelopment. It's been said that Tokyo 2020 Olympics lit this redevelopment project forward. And because this area is a nature preserve, buildings were limited to 15 or 20 meters in height, but they are allowing now for the buildings to be as high as 75 meters.
神宮外苑の敷地は、もともとは国の所有地で、神宮外苑のできる100年以上前は、荒涼とした軍用地でした。第二次大戦後は米軍に接収され、接収が終わると明治神宮の所有地になりました。今回の再開発計画の事業主体は、明治神宮、三井不動産、伊藤忠、日本スポーツ振興センターです。
And the land on which Jingu Gaien sits was a wasteland 100 years ago, used for military, before Jingu Gaien was made. After World War II, this land was confiscated by the U.S. military, and when it was returned, it became land owned by Meiji Jingu. The business operators of this redevelopment plan are Meiji Jingu, Mitsui Fudosan, Itochu, and Japan Sport Council.
再開発計画の背後には政治家たちがいます。石原慎太郎、森喜朗です。2020東京オリンピックのコネクションです。
And this redevelopment plan is backed by politicians. They are Shintaro Ishihara and Yoshiro Mori, otherwise known as the Tokyo 2020 Olympics crew.
So this development plan is going to completely reshape the park, taking away a variety of things. Nearly 1,000 trees, many of them 100 years old, historic baseball and rugby stadiums, sports facilities that are used by the general public, such as the golf driving range, the second baseball stadium, the futsal courts, the batting dome, 6 softball fields, and 4 cafes. Of the 1,000 trees that are going to be cut down, many of them are huge 100-year-old ones like the ones in this picture. Now, the government says that they are going to preserve the trees, including by transplanting them. However, successfully transplanting large old trees is practically impossible and often ends up being a death sentence for them. We only need to look at what happened with the new National Stadium. And if you go there, many of the trees surrounding the stadium that were transplanted in the building process are in terrible shape. And here's a picture of one that I took on the left earlier this year. You can see it was shorn of most of its branches and basically was dead at that point. And indeed, in the picture on the right, more recently, had been completely cut down. Jingu Stadium, which was built in 1926, is one of the 3 remaining stadiums where Babe Ruth played. And it's historically significant and architecturally significant and should be named a landmark. And in fact, in a recent poll of Japanese baseball fans, They named it as their second favorite stadium in the entire country.
日本の甲子園球場、アメリカのフェンウェイパーク、リグリー球場は同時代の建築です。それらはどれもリノベーションに成功しています。これと同じ時代の神宮球場も大いに参考にすべきだと思います。
And Japan's Koshien Stadium, America's Boston's Fenway Park, Chicago's Wrigley Field were all built in the same period. And these are all successful cases of renovation. Jingu Baseball Stadium is also from the same period, and we should take notes from these successful renovation projects.
神宮球場は1926年竣工。設計は小林正一です。竣工年も設計者も神宮外苑の中にあり、今は国の重要文化財となっている絵画館と同じです。100年前のデザインがよく残されており、壊さずにランドマークとすべきです。
And the construction of Jingu Baseball Stadium was completed in 1926, and Masaichi Kobayashi was the architect. Today it's treated no differently than any national cultural heritage, like the Meiji Memorial Picture Gallery. The architecture is from 100 years ago. It's well preserved, and we must preserve it as a landmark without destroying it.
秩父宮ラグビー場もまた日本のラグビーにとって聖地です。歴史的な存在です。客席がフィールドに近く、日本の2大ラグビー聖地のうちの一つです。ラグビーはどんな天候でも行われる伝統的なスポーツで、天候も作戦のうちなんだそうです。屋根付きのラグビー場は必要でしょうか？
And Prince Chichibu Memorial Rugby Ground is a sanctuary for Japanese rugby. It is a historical site. It's one of the two large rugby sanctuary in Japan where the seatings are close to the field. Rugby is a traditional sport where games are played in any weather. And it's said that weather is part of the game. But do we really need a rugby field with a roof?
日本青年館の12階からの眺めです。神宮球場と秩父宮ラグビー場、イチョウ並木、そして緑の木々が一体になっています。広い空があります。計画ではラグビー場と野球場の場所を入れ替えるそうですけれども、そんな必要があるんでしょうか？
And this is the view from the 12th floor of Nippon Seinenkan. You can capture the Jingu Baseball Stadium, Prince Chichibu Memorial Rugby Ground, ginkgo tree-lined blocks, and the lush greenery all in one eye shot. And there is the sky opening out over them. And according to the plan, they plan to relocate the rugby field and the baseball stadium, but is there really a need to do this?
The sports facilities used by the general public in the park are really beloved, and they're very rare in central Tokyo. The only sports facility for use by the public that's going to remain under the plan is going to be an expensive private tennis club. The cafes next to the Ginkgo Avenue are a popular spot, both for casual meals and special events like wedding receptions. They are all going to be torn down, and where they are right now is just going to be a blank wall of the baseball stadium. So completely changing, or you could say ruining the atmosphere.
都市計画公園という非常に制限の厳しい地域に、東京都と事業者は一部それを取りやめて 公園でなくするなど、さまざまな手法を駆使して高層ビルを建てようとしています。
And the urban planning for parks is carried out in an area with very stringent regulations. Tokyo Metropolitan Government and the business operators are canceling some parts of this urban planning for parks and getting rid of parks, in addition to doing other things and doing more of this and that in an effort to try to build high-rise buildings.
計画されている商業的にぎわい部分はまるでショッピングモールです。
And the commercial crowd zone that is planned is nothing but one big shopping mall.
イチョウ並木の4列目からわずか8メートルのところに野球場の壁、高さ約12メートルが迫り、その上にさらにバックネットや電光掲示板が建てられます。合わせた高さはイチョウと同じ25メートルにもなります。このような建設計画はイチョウの根を傷めるのではないかと懸念されています。
A wall of the baseball stadium appears at a location of only 8 meters from the fourth ginkgo tree line block. The wall's height is approximately 12 meters there, and there will also be atop this wall a backnet and electric signboard. So the combined height will be 25 meters, which is the same height as the ginkgo tree. We are concerned that this kind of construction will be damaging the roots of the ginkgo trees.
イチョウ並木の保全については、ランドスケープアーキテクトの石川美希子中央大学教授が、新宿御苑トンネル整備の際の実例を挙げて、イチョウ並木を守るには、建造物から最低15メートルの距離が必要であるという40年にわたる調査の結果報告をしました。新宿御苑の緑道では15メートルを境にそれ以上離れた樹木は順調に成長しますが、そうでない樹木は水系を断たれて枯れ、約 30% しか残存していないということが分かりました。
And on the conservation of the ginkgo tree line blocks, Chuo University professor Mikiko Ishikawa, who is a landscape architect herself, has conducted a survey extending 40 years and has reported that, citing a case study on the Shinjuku Gaien tunnel upgrade, that there is a need for a distance of at least 15 meters from the building structure in order to protect the ginkgo tree line blocks. In the case of the Shinjuku Gyoen's greenery lined road, the study showed that when a 15-meter distance or when given a 15-meter distance or more, the trees will grow fine. However, trees that are not given will not have their distance, 15 meters or more, will have their water source cut off, creating a survival rate of only about 30%.
Yes, and just to be clear, the plan for Jingu Gaien is only a distance that you can see in this picture of 8 meters. So it's about half of what's recommended for safety of the trees. So the developers really tried to keep this project as hush-hush as possible. And there was only one small public meeting that was held in December, and there was only a very small notice in the ward bulletin that I think not a lot of people actually read to tell about it. And also the developers knew about the scale of the planned tree destruction. If you're going to put a building where a bunch of trees are, it's pretty clear you're going to have to cut them down. But they didn't announce it. They really tried to not talk about it. And again, as it was mentioned, Professor Ishikawa was essential for bringing to light the scale of destruction of trees involved in this plan. Once the information was made available, she walked the entire Jingu Gaien, comparing the plan to the actual trees to calculate how many would need to be cut down. Later this spring, she also made an alternative plan for what could be done in Jingu Gaien that would not necessitate cutting down so many trees. Fundamentally, her plan involves leaving the rugby stadium and the baseball stadium in their current locations. This plan was approved by the Tokyo Planning Commission in early February. And many people in Tokyo, like myself, found out about it at that time and were pretty shocked. Here's this huge change being planned to an important space in Tokyo and a huge number of trees that will be cut down and its historic structures that will be leveled. Why wasn't there any public discussion? So that was the time at which I started a petition asking for the plan to be revised and reviewed. At this point, we have over 87,000 people who have signed the petition. When I started the petition, I was really hoping that Governor Koike would listen to the voices of the people who were so upset about this and not approve the plan. But unfortunately, she did go ahead and approve the plan in March. Maybe she thought people wouldn't care that much. I don't know, but that's what she did.
5月20日には、神宮外苑の歴史的景観と環境を守るよう、東京都議会に陳情、公式手続きにのっとった要望の文書を提出いたしました。この文書には、4672人の賛同者が集まりました。
And on May 20th, we submitted a Chinjo document, an official petition document that is, to the Assembly of Metropolitan Tokyo to protect Jingu Gaien's historical scenery and environment. And this petition has garnered 4,672 signatures.
日本では環境アセスメントは事前ではなく計画が発表されてから行われます。環境アセスメントの委員たちは事業者からの環境の影響に対する情報が不足していると審査を現在ペンディングにしています。特に4列のイチョウ並木など樹木の保存に関する資料が足りないと懸念を示しています。写真は神宮外苑再開発に対する環境アセスメントの意見公聴会の様子です。委員が市民の声に熱心に耳を傾けていました。
And in Japan, environmental assessment is carried out not before but after the redevelopment plan is announced. The members of the environment assessment team will put the assessment under pending when the information on environmental impact from the business operators is deemed inadequate, is seen as inadequate. Currently, they have expressed a concern regarding a lack of supporting documents on the conservation of trees, namely about the 4 ginkgo line tree blocks. The photograph you see here is from a Jingu Gaien's redevelopment public hearing regarding the environmental assessment. And you can see that the committee members were listening dutifully to the city residents.
So it's a pretty unusual thing to have the Environmental Assessment Committee have a project be put on hold, or at least the assessment be put on hold, the way has happened in this case. So that took place at the end of May, and we're still waiting for the developers to submit their information and for the Environmental Assessment Committee to continue to consider. But when this unusual thing happened, at the end of May, Governor Koike did something else very unusual, that she sent a letter to the developers, excuse me. And she basically told them to shape up and told them to, hey, give more information, and also told them that sympathy and participation from the public are key. But that's kind of a late stage in the game to be making such a request to the developers. That getting public participation on a plan that's been completely put together isn't really going to be possible. And actually, the only thing the developers have suggested so far is they said, oh, well, we're going to have a tree planting event. They're not showing any willingness to rethink the project or really get public input. And also, given all the things that we've just shared about the many problems of this project, getting public sympathy doesn't seem to be likely. And in fact, at the end of June, the Tokyo Shimbun conducted a survey of Tokyo voters, and 69.5% of them said that they were against the development plan, and only 5.7% said they were in favor. The rest were not sure, didn't know enough to have a decision. That's a pretty overwhelming public opinion against something. So we're really hoping that Governor Koike will listen to the voice of the people and take this project back to the drawing board and rethink it properly from the standpoint of historical and environmental preservation, and also listening to the true interests of the people of Tokyo. So that's it for our prepared comments. So we're available to answer questions. And what we're going to do with the questions, just to keep things flowing well, is that for each question, Nishikawa-san will answer first, and then I may or may not add something for each one.
Okay, if you have questions, please raise your hand and come up to the microphone and state your name and media affiliation if you have one. I'll start the questioning. What about, you say Koike responded in a strange way in May. What about any other support that you have felt within the Tokyo metropolitan government?
Supporting as in supporting what?
Has any other member of the Tokyo metropolitan government offered support to your cause?
東京都庁の方でですね、この抗議運動を、賛同している方はいますでしょうか。
はい、東京都知事は、この計画について、なるべく木を残すようにということと、情報を事業者に対してなるべく、公開するようにということと、それから計画の、この建設については、都民、市民の、協力というか、一緒に共同をするようにというようなことを発表していますけれども、非常に私どもは不満足でいます。というのは、その計画を進行するのを前提として、一緒に木を植えましょうとか、そういうことを言ってるんですけれども、とても私たちはそれには賛同できません。でこの間、いろいろ都議会の議員の方々に説得に回っています。一部の、会派は非常に賛同してくださってますけれども、まだまだ少数です。で、メジャーな会派の方は、小池都知事と同じような見解で、なるべく、都民参加をしましょうとか、なるべく木は残しましょうとかいう曖昧な返答しかいただいていません。
So, regarding the Tokyo governor, what she has been thinking regarding this plan is, and what she has been saying is that let's do our best to keep as many trees as possible, and let's do our best and she says, been saying this to the business operators, which are the redevelopers, to provide information to the people. And with regard to the construction, the Tokyo governor has announced that let's try to work as much with the Tokyo metropolitan residents, with the city residents, but we are not satisfied with just that at all, because what their plan is and what they have been announcing is just telling people to let's plant the trees together, and just that alone is not something that we can agree with. So we've been going to other places. We've been talking to the council members, trying to convince them that this plan should not move forward. But it's only a very few number of council members who are supporting us, and the majority is of the same opinion as the Tokyo government. And every time we go back to the Tokyo governor or people who are of the same mindset as the Tokyo governor, they say the same thing over and over, and they're very ambiguous when they're dealing with us.
Yeah, and I'd just like to emphasize, the whole approach that the Tokyo government has been taking, starting with Governor Koike and all the official pronouncements from the planning department, et cetera, have all been things like, oh, we're going to preserve as many trees as possible, or oh, we're going to make it a wonderful green space, or oh, it's going to be a sports cluster. In other words, just purely advertising type phrases that you'd see, in a commercial or something like that. You could say, oh, we're going to preserve as many trees as possible, but if you look at the plan where buildings are being put where trees are, it's obvious those trees aren't going to be preserved. So they say things that sound good, but if you examine them, they really aren't very meaningful. And so that's really been their way of deflecting criticism. And unfortunately, most people in the Japanese media just report verbatim these advertising phrases and don't question them.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? One important question, I think, is what about the Yakult Swallows and the Japan Rugby Football Union? Have you had any reaction from them?
They have not, no. Okay. No, they have not made any public statements whatsoever about this. I think they don't have any choice, or they don't feel politically safe to do so.
Which seems very strange. In terms of the new stadiums, you told me that the rugby stadium is going to be a domed stadium or roofed stadium, which is unusual. Is the baseball stadium going to be domed or open?
はい、野球場の方は、高さ60メートルのホテルがくっつきます。14階建てだったかな。はい。で、野球場からホテルから野球を見るというような計画なんでしょうか。この伝統的な非常に歴史のある100年の歴史のある球場を壊して、そんなホテル付きの野球場を作るなんてちょっと信じられません。
So the baseball stadium, they plan to build a hotel with a height of 60 meters, or in other words, 14 stories, 14 floors. And they may be building this hotel and try to sell it in a way where they would tell their guests you can watch baseball games from their hotel. But they seem to be just tearing down what we have spent 100 years to build, and that is something that we cannot accept whatsoever.
Okay, I have a question from my colleague Andrew Horvat. He says that this transformation of the parkland to for-profit activities seems to be part of a general trend. So how serious is this move to destroy public park spaces or park areas or green areas for commercial properties, commercial ventures
Okay.
in Japan.
So that's a great question, and actually this is a national problem where parks are being threatened by for-profit development is not just Jingu Gaien. All over the country, there are parks where developments are being planned. Restaurants, cafes, sports stadiums, beer halls, glamping establishments. In Yokohama, planning a flower exhibition. All sorts of different development plans are in the works, and there are actually two things that the national government is doing that are promoting these to happen. One is there's something called the Park Pfi Law, and PFI stands for Private Financing Initiatives. So this is something that encourages privatization of park land and park facilities. And when these plans go into place, the commercial facilities are part of it, and they usually put the commercial facilities where there's green space or there's trees. There's also a plan by the sports agency to be promoting the development of new stadiums across the country, particularly in the middle of cities. And usually the space in the middle of cities where you can easily put a stadium would tend to be a park. And so those become the target for that as well. So there are Doho Park in Tsukuba. We've got Mitsuzawa Park in Yokohama. We've got Kamiseya in Yokohama. We have Oji Koen in Kobe. We have the Kyoto Prefectural Botanical Garden. We have another park in Shibuya. There's a bunch of different ones that are currently issues in their communities where the same thing is happening. Also, there are ones where these have already been completed. So Central Park in Hiroshima, the large open space and a lot of the trees were replaced by a giant soccer stadium recently. There is a park in the middle of Nagoya that was basically turned into an open-air shopping center. And also Miyashita Park in Shibuya is another example that happened under the auspices of this law. So it is definitely kind of an epidemic.
Do you have any examples of projects where the public has had an influence in preventing abuse of the public land?
The only one that I'm aware of is there was a park in Fukuoka that was not being developed for commercial reasons, but for sort of a new public facility. And there was a big public outcry last summer, and they scaled back significantly the plans to chop down trees for the plan. They still are doing the redevelopment, but they did change it a lot based on the outcry. That's the one that I know that's had a big impact so far.
And Andrew continues, how does Tokyo compare with other world cities in terms of green space available for public use?
Oh, very, very low. I want to say that Tokyo has something like 7% of public green space, and you compare that to London, which I think is 30 or 40% or something like that. And it's just very low on green space to begin with. So each one of these projects that takes away green space and puts in concrete is just making the problem worse.
Okay. Please.
ここのメンバーの林ですけどね、いいですか？Japanese is okay? Okay. 今日私の友人からちょっと出てくれって言われてね、で出てきたんで、ちょっと話聞いてびっくりしたんだけど、私のところに入ってる話だともうこれ決まってるってね、もうほぼもうなんかいわゆる、裏舞台の話だとラグビー協会は人数もっと秩父宮入れたいし、野球の方も 使い勝手が悪いから、神宮が。で、なぜかもうほとんども決まってるっていうような話、認識だったの、私はね。それが今日来てみたら、これから環境アセス、環境アセスっていうのは、ご存知の通り、大体みんな紐付きというか、多くてね、よっぽどにない限りは脳が出ないというか、だけど私の知ってる限りだと、横浜市がね、ちょっとさっき横浜のガーデンのこと言ってたけども、横浜がカジノをね、決めたとき、市民が本気になって反対したらね、なくなったのよ、あれがね。で、この神宮のこと、今日初めて聞いて、その木を1000本切るとか、まさかのショッピングセンターで切るとかね、知らないんだと思うんだよね。我々ね、スポーツの間で言ってるのは、秩父宮のラグビーが、もっと要するにもう大きいのが欲しいと、毎回1万人とかなんとかとしたかな、なんか、ね、券を持って売りたいと、ラグビー協会もね。で、野球もなんかいろいろ学生スポーツからいろいろプロを使ってて、使い勝手とかいろんなもんで、たださっき話だとなんか、甲子園と同じようになんかね、今のテクノロジー使えばできるという、全然伝わってない、ね、だから反対運動が、というかどこにジャッジする、情報というかね、全然出てないわけよね。で、これ東京新聞が7割ね。で、東京新聞の私仲間なんかも知ってるけど、ほとんど話題にならないね、これね。もし本当にいわゆるどのポイントでやるか分からないけど、これはもう今これからの環境問題とか、私も環境問題やってるんだけど、これエシカルだとかね、そういう世界中の流れから言ったら、このところにビル建ててね、今更ニューヨークみたいな真似事をするなんてね、いらないわけよ、東京にはね。それをちゃんともっとね、ちゃんと庶民のレベルで分かるような活動まで下げないと、横浜のさっき言ったように、カジノは非常に庶民のレベルまで落ちた。
Can we get a question? 質問は。質問。
Yeah, I'd like to ask you something.
Okay.
Yeah, just including my opinion.
Okay, well, other people maybe want to
Yeah,
ask.
okay. That's why I'd like to ask you, もうちょっとみんなにね、宣伝するようにしてもらった方がいいと思います。
はい、林さんどうもありがとうございます。ぜひ林さんのお知り合いの、
Sorry, can we translate the question, please?
Okay.
スポーツ関係者の方とか。
So there is a community and of friends, and they told me to go to this event. So I am here today. And from what I heard the decision was already made about this. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I heard that the decision was already made. But then I came here, listened to your presentation, and I now understand that the environmental assessment has not even completed yet. So in the case of the Yokohama project, the city residents, they got seriously, they protested seriously, then that project went away. But here with this project, they'll be cutting down more than 100 trees. They'll have a shopping center, but we don't need all of that. And when these protest activities are happening, they are not trickling down in information to our level. We are not made aware of it. We don't have the information to judge what we should think about them. That's not available to us. Even Tokyo Shimbun, Tokyo newspaper, they haven't picked up this topic as well as to my knowledge. And again, this is an environmental matter. We don't need to do something like what they're doing in New York City over here in Tokyo. We need more activities that the city residents can understand, can get involved in.
林さんどうもありがとうございます。林さんのと一緒にですね、ぜひ林さんの知り合いのスポーツの関係者の方ですとか、一緒に議論の場を作っていきたいと思います。 私たちはささやかではありますけれども、すぐ隣に東京体育館っていう建物があるんですけれども、その地下の会議室に何回か集まりまして、勉強会を開いたり、樹木の専門家ですとか、都市計画の専門家ですとか、そういった方を招いて、勉強会を開いたり、それから外苑ウォーク、フィールドワークと名付けてですね、いろんな方と一緒に現地を歩く会もしております。ぜひお仲間も一緒に誘っていただいて、一緒に歩いたり議論したりしましょう。で、海外、先進国では、例えばスイスとかオランダとか、そういったヨーロッパの国では、何か大きな計画があると、それは民間であれ公共でありなんですけれども、模型を持ってきて、それについて将来の夢を一緒に市民も専門家も当事者も事業者も一緒に語るような場があって、それを何ヶ月か繰り返すというふうに聞いています。日本もそういったいいことをやるんだったら、どんどん議論して明るい未来を議論するっていうような土壌ができたらいいと思います。一つですけれども、みんなのみんなのアムステルダム国立美術館っていう映画があるんですけれども、その、国立美術館を建て替えるっていうか改修するときに、やっぱり市民から議論が起こりまして、その様子を5年間ぐらいなんですけれども、ドキュメンタリーに撮った映画があります。そんなのも参考にしたいと思っています。ありがとうございます。
Mr. Hayashi, thank you for your feedback. We would very much love to discuss the way of sports and find a place where we could talk about all of these things. And at the Tokyo Coliseum, the Sports Coliseum, there are meeting rooms in the basement, and sometimes we use them for holding study groups. We invite urban redevelopment and urban planning experts, experts on trees, and we have discussions about the various topics. We also do a Gaien field work where we take a stroll and see what's going on site. So we would very much invite all of you to come with us, walk on site, do a field walk, and talk about things that we need to talk about. And in Europe, I believe it was in Switzerland and Holland, whenever they have large projects, whether it's a public project or a private project, what happens is they create a model and they bring that to some location, a meeting location, and they invite experts, the business operators, the redevelopers, the people who live there to talk about what kind of dream this model can help us build. And we do this, well, they do this in Europe over several months. Japan should do something very similar and create a place a venue where we could discuss all of these things in detail. And I think there was a documentary also about when the National Museum of Amsterdam was renovated. I think that took about 5 years, and this documentary covers all of those 5 years and shows what type of discussions were held between the city and the other players, and how that successfully came to renovating the Amsterdam National Museum. So perhaps we could use this documentary as a reference guide as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Hayashi brought up one very significant point, and that is media reaction. He said Tokyo Shimbun hasn't contributed anything. In the West, in my country, in England, there would be an automatic response in the media. Have you had any response at all in the media in Japan?
There has been quite a bit of media coverage in newspapers mainly. However, it's been just, I think maybe each major newspaper has done 1 or 2 articles, something like that. It hasn't been as much as we would like. And with the exception of NHK, most of the Japanese TV stations have stayed away from this topic.
About the stadiums, do you have the capacity of the new stadiums compared to the old stadiums? Are they going to be bigger, much bigger?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I do believe they are going to be a little bit larger. Particularly with the rugby stadium, it's going to be, excuse me, not just for rugby, but it's going to be a multi-use, including for concerts and things like that. So it's going to have a larger capacity, and the whole thing is going to be just larger.
Do you know what the capacity of Jingu Stadium is at the moment?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
Nor do I. Okay. Who actually approved the plan? Is it Tokyo Metropolitan Government?
Yes. So it was first approved by the Planning Commission, and then Governor Koike approved it.
And you mentioned also an alternative, possible alternative plan drawn up by a university professor?
Yes, Professor Nishikawa.
Have any other, and that alternative plan involved leaving the stadiums where they were, as far as I can see. Has anybody else drawn up alternative plans that would involve new stadiums that wouldn't damage the ginkgo trees?
Professor Ishikawa's original plan involved rebuilding the stadiums at their original location, but she since has mentioned to us that she doesn't think they necessarily need to be rebuilt. So, there was another group of architects who put forth another plan, but theirs was to leave the stadiums as they were and not rebuild them. So those are the 2 existing alternative plans that I'm familiar with.
Okay, so general opinion is that they don't actually need to do anything.
Right. No information has been given substantiating why these stadiums need to be rebuilt and why they can't be renovated. And there was a sort of I guess you call it a mini hearing. It's called a kancho rek in Japanese. This spring with members of the sports agency who are they oversee the sports council, which is overseeing the new rugby stadium. And so I posed the question there, have you done a study doing a cost-benefit analysis of rebuilding versus renovating the rugby stadium? And they said no. So they haven't even done that kind of basic analysis. They've just assumed, oh, of course we have to rebuild it, on no factual basis or proof whatsoever.
So are there echoes of the Olympic Stadium misinformation in this problem as well?
Yes. It's definitely following a pattern.
Okay. What about in terms of legal action? Is that possible? If the park is a protected area or was a protected area, what kind of legal certainty does that have?
Well, while she's getting that, they lowered the limits, and it was legal for them to do that. So I don't think you can that aspect. But let's hear Nishikawa-san on the legal aspect.
はい、東京都の方では高さをどれだけ、許可するか許すかっていうところですね、までは決まっているんですけれども、具体的に計画の例えば、まず、ラグビー場を建設するときには、建築では確認申請というのが必要ですので、それはまだ設計もできてませんし、それが通過するっていうこともまだいつ通過するかっていうのも決まってません。ですので大枠だけはこの大きさだけは許しますよっていうところまでは決まっているので、具体的な内容については、これから設計がされるでしょうし、それが 法的手続きで、建築、日本では建築の許可ではなくて建築の確認っていうんですけれども、それが法的に合ってますから OK ですっていうのが出るのはまたその先になりますので、まだまだ設計を変更してもらうっていうことは可能です。というのはやっぱり天下の明治神宮や日本の一流企業である伊藤忠、そして国の下部機関である日本スポーツ振興センターが都民や国民の気持ちに反して大規模な開発をするっていうことについて本当に SDGs に合ってるかどうかっていうのを反省する機会はまだまだあると思います。つまり許可されたのは大枠、これまでできるよっていうところまでなんですね。だから全然その以下でも全然 OK なんです。というところを言っておきたいです。
So the Tokyo government has permitted how high the building can be constructed, up to what height it could be constructed, but that's the only thing that has been permitted, decided so far. And the specific plan, the details of the plan, details of the rugby stadium and so forth, it hasn't been discussed yet. It hasn't been decided yet. And so there is really no plan yet, and it hasn't even passed through all the channels that it needs to pass through. What has been decided is therefore the framework. That's the only the broad framework that has been decided, and the details of it has not been decided yet. Please understand that. And that will be designed going forwards, and whether we'll be taking any legal action, that will be decided based on what the specifics will be detailed down to. And in Japan, we don't. That's part of the kakunin process in architecture in Japan. So and you have to understand that. And what I would like to say is that changes to the design can still happen. There's still possibility to do that. There's time to do that. And if the top company of Japan, like Itochu, and the major organization in sports, the Sports Council of Japan, they're going to work together to make something like this, and you already see that the people and the metropolitan Tokyo residents are against this, then you have to also understand we have to look at whether this is in line with the SDG. And there's more time for them to rethink whether they are doing the right thing. So we have to create an opportunity for them to rethink. And please understand, again, that what is decided is only the broad framework and nothing else.
それから2つ付け加えますと、1つは、この設計はどうも日建設計っていうところが設計をしているらしいです。日建設計っていうのは規模では日本を代表する建築の設計事務所です。で、アーキテクトがいっぱいいるわけですけれども、そういったアーキテクトと市民はぜひ話し合いをしたいと思います。それからもう一つ、先ほどラガーマンやヤクルトファンの話が出ましたけれども、心の優しいラガーマンやヤクルトファンが1000本の木を救ったということになれば、どんな素敵なことでしょう。
And two more points. The architecture firm is, from what we heard, is Nikken Sekkei, and that this is a law firm, not a law firm, I'm sorry, architectural firm that is #1 in Japan. They have the most architects. And what we believe should happen is that the architects at this firm should have a dialogue with the city residents to find out what needs to happen. And then a moment ago, Mr. Hayashi was talking about the Ruggers and the Yakult fans, and if we can get them to help us save 1,000 or more trees, then I think that would be a beautiful message to send out.
Okay, thank you. Just one final question from me. Have you actually spoken to the companies involved in the redevelopment?
Do you want to start?
はい、再開発、さっきも言いましたように、事業主体は、神宮が、すみません、明治神宮、そして、三井不動産、伊藤忠商事から日本スポーツ振興センターです。で、環境アセスメントなどに登場する事業主体の中心は、三井不動産です。三井不動産が、環境アセスメントでは説明をしています。
So the business operators or the redevelopers, those are Meiji Jingu, then Mitsui Fudosan, Itochu, and Japan Sports Council. And the company, the operator that is primarily involved in the environmental assessment is Mitsui Fudosan.
Yes, and so with the petition, we put together request letters on behalf of the signers, and we have for Tokyo Metropolitan Government, but also we prepared them for all the developers, the companies and organizations just named. And we presented it, we were able to actually go there and hand the letter over to the sports center and to Meiji Jingu. In the case of Itochu and Mitsui Fudosan, they would not even meet with us for us to hand them a piece of paper and insisted that we just send it in the mail. So they don't seem particularly interested in dialogue.
Okay. And what's the timeline for the stadium? When do they actually start knocking stuff down?
すべての完成は15年後だというふうに言われています。でそれは徐々に伸びていっていますけれども、13年後が15年後に伸びたりしていまして、今のところ15年後にすべてのプロジェクトは完成するというふうに言われています。が、ラグビー場を先に建設するような情報が入ってきていまして、その敷地に今、建国の森っていう緑豊かな場所があるんですけれども、そこの木を3分の2ほど伐採する予定なんですけれども、その伐採が来年の早々か、そのぐらいに始まるのではないかというふうに懸念されております。
So all of this is expected to complete in 15 years, but this schedule keeps getting postponed. Initially it was 13 years, now it's 15 years. That's the current update. And from the information that we currently have, the most up-to-date information we have, we hear that they're going to build the rugby stadium first. Then also we hear that there's another public greenery area called Keikoku no Mori, and we hear that they're going to cut down 2/3 of the trees in this area, and they plan to do this sometime early next year if we have the information correct, and that's another concern for us.
I'd just like to add also that currently there is sewer construction happening for preparations for creating the new rugby stadium. And if you look at the signboard that's posted where this sewer construction is happening, they issued the what do you call it, the purchase order for this construction, and it actually started before the whole entire project was approved by the Tokyo government this spring. So they were so sure, oh, we're definitely going to do this, that they started the sewer construction before everything was approved. And that's going on currently. That, you know, some of the area is the street is ripped up because they're putting in the sewers.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any final comments?
Okay, so as was pointed out by one of our questions, we are really hoping to get more public attention on this matter, and we feel that the more citizens can be informed, that will really help make clear the need for rethinking this plan. And also, public opinion internationally is very important. So we're particularly glad to be able to be here at the FCCJ to be talking to the international press, because Tokyo is a global city, and Jingu Gaien is a famous location that many tourists from abroad like to visit. And so then also this is a very kind of big political issue right now that deserves attention. So we really appreciate your listening to this.
Okay, I want to thank Rochelle Kopp and Naoko Nishikawa, as well as interpreter Andrew Meehan for coming here for a very informative and useful presentation. Thank you very much, and we're done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.